All right, guys, be prepared to be very disturbed by this story that I'm about to deliver for you right now. So, this is in Mediaite. They say Parkland cop who stayed outside during shooting found not guilty on all counts collapses in tears as verdict read. So, this was one of our 14,312 mass shootings that happens all the time. It was a school shooting. Homeboy did not do his job as an officer, and now he's let off. So let me break this down for you because it gets a little bit complex, and I want everybody to understand the full scope of this. So they say a Fort Lauderdale jury found former Parkland School resource officer Scott Peterson not guilty on all 11 counts Thursday related to his actions during the February 14th, 2018 shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The shooter, a former student at the high school, returned to campus armed with an AR-15 rifle and shot and killed 17 people and wounded 17 others. In accordance with the wishes expressed by numerous family members of the victims to not promote the shooter, I have not used his name. He was sentenced to life in prison last October, a verdict that was condemned by many family members of the victims. The 17 people who lost their lives were in alphabetical order. Okay, I'll give you. So there's Alyssa, Scott, Martin, Nicholas, Aaron, Jamie, Christopher, Luke, Kara, Gina, Joaquin, Elena, Meadow, Helena, Alexander, Carmen, and Peter. They say prosecutors accused Peterson of disregarding his training and standing by during the shooting, while his defense attorneys argued that he was unable to tell from which direction the shots were coming. The specific charges against Peterson related to those who were shot on the third floor of the building after he arrived on the scene. No one was killed on the second floor, and he was not charged for any of the deaths or injuries that occurred on the first floor before he arrived. Peterson was charged with 11 counts, including 7 felony counts of child neglect and 3 misdemeanor counts of culpable negligence and a misdemeanor count of perjury for allegedly lying to investigators about the number of gunshots he heard after arriving at the scene and about whether he saw people fleeing the 1200 building, the site of the school shooting. So I want you to keep in mind these exact charges, okay? Child neglect, culpable negligence, and perjury. Those are the charges, okay? He pled not guilty to all counts. After the jury returned their verdicts, not guilty on all counts, the judge read each one out loud in the courtroom as Peterson could be visibly seen shaking and crying, collapsing onto the table as his attorneys put his arm around him. Reached for comment shortly after the verdict was read, Ryan Petty, whose daughter Elena was killed, told Mediaite that, quote, nothing in today's verdict absolves Scott Peterson of his inaction on February 14th, 2018. Peterson was at the door of the building, heard shots, and retreated to cover and stood there for 48 minutes while the killer continued his rampage. Peterson remained behind that cover even after other law enforcement had entered the building and were treating casualties. He will have to live with his failures the rest of his life. So now you understand what he did. He was at the door of the building, heard shots, he retreated to cover and stood there for 48 minutes while the killer was continuing to kill, and even other law enforcement got there, leapfrogged him, and started doing their jobs. Now, he claims, I don't know which direction the shot was coming from. But here's what we know for sure. If you stay put, more people are going to die. Now, you don't know which direction it's coming from. Okay, go look. Now, I get it's hard. I get it's scary. I get you're putting your life in danger. That's what you signed up for. That's what you signed up for. So look, ultimately what happened in this case is that it was a square peg, round hole type situation. What this guy did was egregious. I would argue it was unethical and immoral. But the fact of the matter is they were trying to muck up charges because there is no actual charge for the specific crime he committed. So they landed on child neglect, which seems like a stretch because when you think of child neglect, you think of what? Like a parent with their kid and they're not feeding him enough or they're not changing their diaper enough. And, you know, that's child neglect, right? And then culpable negligence. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the specifics of culpable negligence, but I don't think when they crafted that law, they had in mind the situation that unfolded at Parkland. I think they had something else in mind entirely. And then they tried to get him on perjury because of things he said, contradictions, etc. And so he was found not guilty. So I think the real problem here, like I think the jury, based on the law, The jury actually got it right. But I would argue this needs to be illegal. There needs to be a new law against this, and he should go down on that, right? Now, I would have been okay if they did, if the jury basically decided we don't care that he's not guilty of these laws, we're still going to send him to prison anyway because he's guilty of a law that doesn't exist, but it should exist, right? The jury's allowed to do that. They have leeway to sort of say, look, we'll let you go. We're going to put you in jail anyway and say you're guilty of these charges, even though you're not guilty of these charges, but you're guilty of a charge that shouldn't exist. So we're just going to say you're guilty of culpable negligence or whatever, right? They can do that. But I think the real solution here is they have to come up with, if you're a first responder, if you're a police officer, and you're hiding when your job is to protect and serve, and there's children who are being massacred, right? What do I think? They should call it like denial of duty or abdication of duty. Like that should be the name of the law. And, you can have, first degree, second degree, third degree, and you can vary the times. You could spend 6 months in prison, a year in prison, 5 years in prison, whatever it might be. And that should be the law. And then if that existed, he would have been found guilty. I don't think there's any doubt they would have been found guilty, unless they could really prove beyond any reasonable doubt that he didn't know where the shots were coming from. And so him staying there, he was actually somehow trying to help the kid. Like, I think if the law existed, he would have went down. But they had to square peg, round hole, and muck something up, and that's why he got off. I think that's the gist of it. And so we need that new law, man. And I think Congress should get on top of it. I mean, it's probably more of a state-by-state thing where states would have to do it. But they got to get on top of that, because you know what? We saw this exact same thing in Uvalde, didn't we? In Uvalde, we saw a bunch of these officers rush in and then stand there as a mass murderer was killing little children. And it's like, no, not okay, not acceptable, not going to allow it, and there should be consequences for that. So you could debate the name of the law, you can debate how much time people should get, first degree, second degree, third degree, etc. But I think all reasonable people would agree that if you have a position of extreme power and authority, if you are a law enforcement official, if you are a first responder, it is incumbent upon you to, in situations like this, at the very least, try your best. And he just didn't. He was scared. He was a bitch, and he hid. And it's like, okay, a lot of people would do that in that situation, but then don't become an officer. Don't be a school officer. Don't do it. Don't do it. Go pick another job. Go pick a job that doesn't require courage at all, right? And you have to make sure that this isn't, a law that's abused. Like, for example, I can think of a scenario where it's like firefighters are saving people in a building, but the head firefighter says, we got to get out because the whole building's going to collapse, and people get out, and then it collapses 3 minutes later, and people could sue him and say, this is abdication of duty because you didn't save, my mother was in the building, you didn't save it. And then, in a situation like that, a jury's going to be like, well, they did as much as they could, and they thought the building was going to collapse. They had to get out. So it can be abused, but, that's the whole purpose of having a judicial system, is like you determine on a case-by-case basis what makes sense and what doesn't, who's guilty, who's not, etc. And in this instance, I think all reasonable people would say this guy acted in an unacceptable way. The cops at Uvalde acted in an unacceptable way. And the bottom line is we just need a new law. We just need a new law, and we need it now because this is unacceptable. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.